Man, y'all know the face, y'all know the name. Y'all tuned into the world's realest podcast, Talk HE podcast, hosted by yours truly, Mr. It's the Movie Cletus Real Talk. And I got a special guest here with me today. As you can tell, it is real therapeutic in here. It is very therapeutic in here. Vibes anonymously. This is good energy. I got a special guest with me. Guest, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Carl Jackman. I don't have a bunch of things to add to my name. I would have thought about them if I knew, but I'm just Carl Jackman for today. So.
Nah, you are bigger than that. You've done a lot of great work in the community. You do a lot of great work with people.
Thank you.
So if you had to say, what do you do? Like if you had to say, how would you quantify what you do?
Yeah, I mean, this is the realest podcast, so I'm going to be real. What I do is I feel like I'm in service to the community. I feel like my purpose here is to support and uplift Black and brown folks, to be able to help them navigate through life, through the United States, through, just being able to, I feel like I'm a collaborator, a conspirator, a thought partner to Black and brown folks. I mean, to the community in general, but specifically highlighting Black and brown folks. And just being able, I want to be able to help and support and assist and empower. And I feel like that's my purpose. And that's something, and I do with passion. And that's like the common theme in everything that I do.
How did you fall into that?
Yeah, I think, if I would think about like my origin story, I think it comes back to like what I was exposed to. I grew up, from a family who was new to the United States. We were on, I had the block of cheese and the powdered milk, and we lived in public housing. And, the things that helped get me to where I am, all, yes, school was a factor, but it was all of those programs that existed. If it weren't for those programs that were around and, so like the youth development leadership program. So, starting with Aspira, when I was in high school in Staten Island, which is like a youth development program for Black and brown young people, but specifically Black and brown young people who come from Hispanic or Latin background. So, those programs just exposed me. The New York Urban League, like all of those programs provided me with a vision and helped me to see things that, my parents maybe saw but didn't know how to articulate or show me. So, I want to be able to give back in that way. All of these, there's numerous programs. I know I'm leaving them out, but there's so many programs that I was involved in that kept me out of trouble, that kept me out of the streets, that kept my mind occupied. I volunteered at a zoo, Staten Island Zoo, when I was a kid. I did the public parks tennis program. I was at Cromwell doing theater. I was in all of these different spaces. My parents didn't know some things, but what they did know is how to keep me engaged and involved in stuff that opened my world, and I want to be a part of that for somebody else.
No, that's major, and I felt like for you, you've definitely been that for me because I met you. How long ago did I meet you? I met you. Was it the Staten Island Children's Museum?
Yeah. Was it through? Were you in C-Step?
I was there for UAU, but I also wasn't STEP program though.
Yeah. So we had students in STEP who were doing their volunteer hours at the Children's Museum. I think that was with Miss Deborah.
Yeah, Miss Deborah Evans.
Yeah, Deborah Evans. Yep. So we had like an informal partnership where we would allow those students to be able. So it might have been through that. It might have been through just volunteering. It might have been through Unity. I feel like our paths overlapped so many times, and I know you did UAU too, but yeah.
I guess my next question is how has your education helped you kind of navigate through these spaces? Because the work that you do, especially when it comes to our people, can be very challenging.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a real thankless job as well.
Yeah.
So how has your education helped you kind of navigate through those spaces?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is the realest podcast, so I'm going to be real. I think the education has helped me give grace to the populations of people that I work with, right? when you encounter people and, they're responding to you or engaging you in a certain way, the education allows me to pause and think a little bit more about the context of where this is coming from. And I think that part has allowed me to give them grace and to be able to see, like, well, what's behind that? Is this somebody trying to be disrespectful or thankful? Or is this a person who's felt disappointed or, maybe feels like they need to test me a little bit to say, like, you say you care, but let's see how much you really care. I'm going to throw this at you. I'm going to say this to you. Are you still going to be there? And I think, for folks who have a mistrust, and I think a lot of times a legitimate mistrust, it allows me to it gives me a little bit more context of like where they might be coming from.
Yeah, that's different because I feel like for me, like I've also kind of aligned with that work. I don't know if I've done it intentionally, but I feel like I really have always done things with the interest of Black and colored people, it's in my best interest, for their best interest or with them in mind. And I am at a place now that it's like I don't know if what's the best way to put this, if that is suitable only to like the things I want to do in life. Like if that's like, if I don't do that, am I a sellout? So I guess my question for you is, did you feel like you had to do this, or did you feel you were called to do this work?
Ooh, that's a heavy question. I think I was called to do this. And I'll provide some context even about like why my focus is here. I say called to this because I feel like, I could have done a lot of different things. I could be in a lot of different spaces, and the things that I choose to do, whether for work or even in my free time volunteering, are things that speak to my heart. And there's something about being able to work and support people in my community that really fulfills me. And it doesn't mean I'm not anti-white. I don't hate white people.
Facts.
Like that has nothing to do with it. I just feel like as a person who comes from a certain background and environment, I feel like I have a duty to give back and to work in those spaces and give back. It doesn't mean that in the many roles that I've had and working at the museums, working as a therapist, working different, it's not like, white client, white staff, like I'm not going to work with you. No, I work with you. I definitely will. I'm not going to turn anybody away. But for me, there's something that's missing in how we are engaged culturally. There's something that's missing. There's a real value. When I worked in the school and a young Black male looks at me, who was not really excited about college admission day at our high school because he had some struggles with academics, and for him to turn to me and say, mister, I see you all the time. Did you go to college? And then I'm like, yeah, I went to college. And he's like, wow, I don't know too many people that look like me that are male that went to college. That conversation hits differently, And
I didn't know that was such a rarity. Like being a Black man in college, like I never thought that was rare. To me, I always thought that I had no choice but to go to college.
Yeah.
Like I thought that we belonged there. I thought that like not going to college meant the end of my life.
Yeah.
Because go to college, get a good job, have a family, find a wife. Not have a family then find a wife. Find a wife then have a family. But I thought that was just the normal progression of life. So for me, I didn't know how rare it is for Black men not to be in colleges.
Yeah, I mean, I don't quote me on like statistics. I mean, I don't know if Black men are going to college less than like white men or Asian men or things of that nature. But I do think some of the messaging and the expectations and the ways that the messages that they hear about college might be different from other communities, even the resources, right? Like working at a school in East New York, we put a lot of emphasis into discipline into, things of that nature, but not as much into uplifting their academic selves or, trying to activate that academic interest in college. I don't necessarily think that college is the be all end all. And I work for an organization that supports young people going to college. But I think that, everybody has different academic levels, different levels of support. If you think about being a first generation person and maybe your family doesn't know what it's like to push you through college, it's like, okay, yes, go to college. That's really important. And now you're like, hey, family, I got the grades. I applied to the college. It's $50,000 a year. And they're like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to do that. The fact that, students are working hard and want to get there, but there's not enough college advisors in the high schools. I don't know what it was like at Wagner, but your college advisor at Wagner might not have been able to work with everybody at the school. In most schools, like the ratio is really low.
So for just to speak to Wagner, I would say that shout out to Miss O'Connell. She was phenomenal, but I also had to seek her.
Yep.
Like I had to seek her.
Yeah.
I had to go above and beyond to make sure that she was there, and I had to go above and beyond to make sure that I got the resources I needed. But that's also to a testament to my family, to my sister, and how she was with her, her process of going to college and going away for college, and I think that's a big point as well.
Yeah, that's actually a data point that I can kind of speak to, that if you have proximity of people in your life who've gone through the college process and can support you, that can lead to college feeling more accessible, college feeling like something that you can do when you have somebody who can speak about the process. So I think, I remember Miss O'Connell as well too. And yeah, I don't think that it's, that college counselors in the high school level don't want to do this work, or even in middle school that they don't. It's just capacity. If the ratio is 1 to 253 students on average, or even higher than that, how many people can they see and support in their college journey, between the start of the school year and, when people are applying. And if you don't have those additional support, so I like to say it's a community support. School is a part of it, but then also being able to have people around you, whether it's family members or mentors or neighbors who can talk you through the process, is really important. And I think, part of why it's passion for me and Black and brown people is that I don't think there's enough people, or we're not accessing enough. We're not showing up and putting people on and saying, well, this is how it works. Like, our parents push us and we have an idea of what it's supposed to look like, but without having the context of somebody who's been there to say, okay, yeah, that's cool, but these are some other ways around it. Or, I think it's really heavy. And we also carry the, what does it mean to be the first generation? What's my responsibility to my family, to my community? Is my college experience only valuable if I go to become a doctor, or if I go to Harvard or Yale? And if I go to Medgar, it's not valuable. So there's a lot of things that we're deconstructing. And, like I said, my parents are not from this country. So for them, it's like, you got to go to Harvard or Yale. They don't know about Lehigh. They don't know about Binghamton. They didn't know about these places. So for them, it's like, oh, you didn't get into Harvard or Yale? You failed.
Wow. And I think that you just spoke to a lot of first generation immigrant kids, kids who may want to jump into things that's not traditional to law, engineering, or healthcare. So how did you find your way? Because you are not solely getting healthcare, but you're not like a doctor. Even though you can be a doctor, you have the aptitude to do so. How did you find your way, and why did you choose the way that you chose?
Yeah, I mean, my path was a non-linear path. When I left high school, I thought I was going to be going to like business. I'm like, because my dad was pushing that, right? He was like, get your Series 7, get your Series 63, sell, mutual funds and stocks and insurance and finance. Because for him, part of his immigrant story is we came here to, making money is the goal, right? And to be able to make money and provide in certain ways is really important. And, I went that route. It didn't work out for me, not the academic part, but just the supports that I needed emotionally, socially. You know, there were things, underlying things that were there that were never addressed or that I didn't even recognize were things at the time. So, you know, when college didn't work out for me the first time that I went, I just worked. And, you know, from those contacts that I made in those high school programs that I did, I went back to them, and they're, you know, somebody at the Urban League was like, oh, yeah, you know, we know you from Aspira. Do you want to come in and be a youth development coordinator in the Staten Island branch office? It used to be on Van Duzer Street in Staten Island. The office is still there. The building is there, but the Urban League office is not there. And somebody believed in me. Somebody was like, you know, somebody saw the potential that I had in the youth programs, how I showed up as like a leader in these programs, and like, hey, I'm going to support you in this, and mentored me, you know, some really powerful Black women. And, you know, really what I realized is that I enjoyed working with young people. I enjoyed supporting them on their journey. And, you know, that led me to a career of youth development, you know, and through that youth development path, what I realized, youth development is like a larger systemic intervention, providing like access, support, exposure. But then I realized that there were other factors. There was mental health, there was intergenerational trauma, there's racial trauma, there's all of these things. And there was a part of me that was like, you know what? I want to be able to help with that. Yes, I can help in this, but I want to be able to help in a deeper level. And that's what led me to going back to school, I did some work at McKee High School in Staten Island with social workers. I'm like, this is the path. This is how I want to go. And that led me going back to school, studying social work as an undergrad, studying social work in graduate school. And, you know, I wanted to be able to add another tool to my belt. Yes, I can talk about things and provide access, but I also wanted to be able to speak to other factors that are a little bit deeper and under the surface that can interfere with young people's progression or success.
So what are some of those things that are like those underlying factors that impact progression of young people?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't really talk about it. You know, I think, and I say we, I think poverty is something that impacts us, right? It can be a traumatic experience. You know, I mentioned to this man earlier, you know, talking about growing up in public housing, and like, you know, the shit was so like normal to me. I grew up at a time, you know, where I would step outside and there would be crack vials on my steps. There would be people peeing and shitting in the staircase, peeing in the elevator. Like shootouts were happening in the playground. You know, if you're from the West, you know about Scotty's and what was happening out there. Like all of those things were happening around me. And, you know, how do those things impact how you feel about safety? How do those things impact how you feel about your future? How does those things impact what you see and what you can accomplish? So I'd say things like poverty. I would say things like just trauma, right? I mean, we all experience trauma, but if you have protective factors that can support you through trauma, that can give you different outcomes than if you don't have those factors. So, you know, yes, we have community healing, we have our faith, church, things like that, but what else can be there to help support us in being able to think about those things? Racism, white supremacy, like all of those things are factors and people trying to navigate. You know, even as a college student, when I did go to college, you know, I had a professor look at me and tell me that I wasn't going to be anything, you know.
I've definitely had that happen to me too.
Yeah, I've had that in multiple parts of my journey. And if I didn't see it differently, a part of me could have, the former me could have been like, well, he knows, he's a professor, he's smart, he's been teaching forever. If he says that I can't do this, then I can't do this, you know. And I think there's a lot of messaging that we get bombarded with about what we can and can't do, and it can be hard for us to affirm who we are, what we're capable of, and to kind of make it through the noise. We're marginalized, you know. Even, you know, you talked about earlier about, you know, this school being PBIs versus PWIs. It can be really hard to go, you know, you grow up in a place, you know, New York City has its racism, but you know, when you go to a place where, you know, there's 2 Black people in the whole town, and now you're on campus, and, you know, people are getting hurt, people are getting killed, they're writing racist things or nooses. Like, it takes something. It takes a lot to be able to persevere through that. And these are the factors. I'd say the impacts of poverty, the impacts of intergenerational historical trauma. I'll say the impact of being marginalized and dealing with racism, systemic racism at that, microaggressions. All of those things are things that are factors. And those are things that are very specific to Black and brown people. And it doesn't mean that white people can't experience some of that or all of it or whatever, but because I've experienced it, because that's the lens that I bring that's different from somebody who is non-Black or non-Black or brown person. I can bring that perspective and hold space for that. Somebody else might be able to work with a student. They might be really nice and really cheerful and really want to help, but they might be lacking the context or not be able to sit with that kids go through real shit and go through things that are impacted by their ethnicity or race. So you can be a really nice white person. There's lots of really nice white people, very friendly white people, very well-meaning white people. But can you hold space for somebody's experience as a first-generation person, as an immigrant? Or does that make you uncomfortable and you try to gloss past that and focus on other things?
That's real. We're going to take a quick break. And we're going to come back to Talking Cheap Podcast. We'll call Jackman. All right, we back. We spoke about a lot of deep things. The last thing we spoke about, if I can remember correctly, was some of the underlying issues or some of the underlying things that make finding support very difficult within our community. And we actually just had a conversation with a future mentee of yours. I'll consider myself a mentee of yours as well. But you spoke about a lot of interesting things, especially about identity affirming treatment. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So can you speak to a little bit of that, because it is Mental Health Awareness Month, and
yes, it is.
We need to talk about mental health, especially as Black men.
Yeah. I think when taking it from like a very entry level, identity affirming care is when you have somebody who can speak to or connect with your experience in a way that is objective, in a way that is maybe not necessarily navigating that medical provider's internalized bias. So like if to make it more simple example, if somebody were to say, hey, Carl, go across the street and speak to that guy with the knit hat and the hoodie. And I'm like, I don't know, he's wearing a hoodie. When I think about people with hoodies, he's probably out here selling drugs, or maybe he's up to no good, or he has a criminal history. There's a lot of assumptions that come because of internalized bias. And it's another thing when you can sit with a person and they're like, oh, I'm sitting with this person with a hoodie because Black men of a certain age like to wear hoodies, and I'm not intimidated by that. Or to say, oh, he talked about this experience about doing these things. That's a normal experience. That's not pathology. And sometimes when we talk about identity affirming care, some of the things that are just things that we do culturally, that we do socially as Black men, as Black people, as brown people, those things can get pathologized. So thinking about a really quick example, and I might get this wrong, but I remember reading about a young lady who I think was a therapist or somebody who was working with them, went to a funeral or somebody in their family died, and this child fell out on the ground, and people pathologize that. I'll give an even better example. Scratch that. Take a step back. There was a therapist who was working with a person, a Black woman, right? And during the sessions, the therapist wrote in her notes that this Black woman kept patting her hair. And the therapist wrote that this must be a sign of some sort of mental pathology, because this Black woman was patting her head while they were in session. Those of us who have Black women in their life are Black women.
She just scratching her head. That's how she scratched her head.
Right, yeah, she's just scratching her head, right? But if you're not familiar with that, you're like, oh my God, this person is patting their head. They've pat their head this must be some sort of neuroses and so just having somebody who can be like, oh, this person is patting their head. Oh, girl, go ahead, do your thing. I'm doing it. I might do that too. I mean, I don't have any hair and I'm not a woman, but, just being able to be understood and seen in that way without the things that we do that are specific to us being pathologized is the reason why identity affirming care can be important.
I love it. So why is mental health important, and how have you went about maintaining your mental health at a good standard?
Yeah, I think for me, mental health is important. I like to say that it's proactively important, not reactively important. I think that as you get your checklist to do whatever it is that you do in life, thinking about your mental health should be a part of that, part of your process. For me, it's really important because mental health for me is at a basic level, self-awareness. How am I doing? How am I feeling? How am I managing through things? And being able to reflect and check in on yourself and how is this going for me? And if there's something that's coming up that is feeling difficult, or to be able to get through it, right? It's kind of like, hey, if my leg is hurting, I check them. If you're going to the gym and you've been going for a while and you notice that your arm is, there's a weird pain in your arm, you might check in with your body and say, okay, there's something going on with my arm. I might need to go and talk to somebody and get some support around it. And I think with our mental health, it's the same way, but I think because of our history, because of the way that we've been marginalized from mental health, due to white supremacy, we've been taught to, and we've learned to just, they're not going to service us anyway, or I'm not going to have access, so I'm just going to work through the pain. And, sometimes, our parents, especially for those of us who are first generation, our parents might not have had access to the same mental health support or even rest or things like that we have. But, we're in a space where we have access to different tools. If I would say with my clients, if when I was a kid, I changed my bicycle tire by hitting it with a rock, that worked because it helped me loosen the tire to change. But is that the best tool for me to use? Now I'm big person with a job. I can afford to buy bicycle tools to change my tire. I could use the rock, but now I have more options because I have a job and I can buy, a couple of tools from Home Depot. So I think mental health for me is important because life is stressful. Life is going to, we can't avoid the stress. We can't avoid all of the things that can interfere with our quality of life. So mental health is important to be aware of how you're doing, be aware of the things that impact and activate you, and to be able to develop the tools to help you to get through it. A lot of times people are like, oh, healing is like a final destination. I like to think of mental health and healing as learning how to stand in the rain, not being able, we can't avoid the rain and we can't ever stop rain from happening, but we can develop and acquire tools that'll help us get through the rain until it stops. And sometimes in life, when things are raining, we learn to avoid. So imagine if I find out it's going to rain later today, I start drinking. I find out it's going to rain, I start drugging. Substance use in a way that's problematic. Drinking. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with if you drink or if you use, other substances, but I'm talking about it in a problematic way, right? If I say that it's raining, it's going to rain tomorrow, and you start using substances in a problematic way, yes, that distracts you from the fact that it's raining, but it doesn't help you to be able to get through the rain, to go to where you need to go. And mental health is really helping us to be able to develop tools to sit in the rain. So somebody else might just feel really anxious and worried and never leave their house. Well, if I never leave my house, then I don't ever have to deal with rain. Somebody else might say, well, what if it rains? Then I might get swept away in the rain, and my clothes are going to be ruined, and the buses are going to be late. And those are different ways in which we learn how to cope and manage with the rain or the stressors that are in our life. Mental health, for me, is a perspective to be able to say, okay, rain is happening. We can't avoid the rain. What are the tools that are going to help us to be able to get through the rain? And once you use those tools a few times, the rain doesn't seem as scary as it was before. It's like, oh, it's raining, no big deal. I put on my boots, I throw on my hoodie, or I grab my umbrella, or I call my Uber and, it's not a big deal. So mental health, being able to develop our mental health provides us with the tools to get through the stress or the rain. And the more that we do that, it allows us to be able to to have less of an impact of kind of taking away from our ability to participate and engage and enjoy life, because we're avoiding or distracting from these things that are stressors.
No, understandable. For me, mental health has been a challenge as well because I'm young and I'm just trying to figure it out.
Facts.
And I'm trying to get it.
Facts.
And I feel like when you're young and you're trying to get it, what tends to happen is like you're just chasing it so hard that you sometimes neglect the fact that you got to take care of yourself.
Yeah, facts.
So when you were my age, how did you deal with your mental health, and what were some of the things that you had to address to get to the point of where you are now?
Yeah, I'll say this. You're ahead of me, because when I was your age, I probably wasn't thinking about my mental health in the ways that I do now. When I was your age, and I'm saying that, there's not a huge difference, but it's not like 50 years. Just
you ain't 80.
I'm not 80. No. But, I think the messages that I heard was, there was a lot of, before we even had this term of hustle or grind culture, that was a thing, right? Like, you don't sleep. There was a line in the Nas song, right? I don't sleep because sleep is the cousin of death. Like, there was this, people glorifying like being on the block for days in the same clothes. Like, it was this message of, you can't rest, you can't, take care of yourself because you will miss out. And, I wasn't thinking about that. So I worked multiple jobs. I've always worked more than one job at a time. But there was a time where I was working a day job from 9 to 5 and then working an overnight job from 10 at night to 7 in the morning, because I felt like this is what I need to do to get where I need to be. And you can have that mentality until your body collapses, right? And that you deny yourself sleep, you deny yourself rest. And now you're like, oh, I've been grinding, and then then you fall asleep. For me, I'm throwing up on the ferry, falling asleep, you standing up. Like, I think there's a romanticized ideal of this hustle and grind culture. I don't say that you shouldn't work hard. I think it's important to work hard. I think that it's very important, but I like to lift up, even with my clients, this idea of duality. You can do multiple things can be true at the same time. You can work really hard and also find time to take care of yourself. You can work really hard on a goal and also carve out 30 minutes for yourself to do nothing. You can also work really hard and plan a Saturday where you're just hanging out with your people, or going to the park, or walking your dog, or hanging out with your partner, or whatever it is. And I think a lot of times when we think about working hard, we take that off the table. We're like, I got to grind. But what you're not including as you're scheduling yourself is time to hang with your people, hang with your family, be to yourself, And I think now what I realize is I like to check in. My partner is somebody who keeps me accountable in that way. So, for me, it's like I like to once I get going and I'm working, I could work until I can't work anymore, right? So I might start really early in the morning, and now it's like 10, 11, 12 o'clock and I'm still going. And my partner is really good at being like, hey, like, you haven't eaten lunch, you haven't eaten dinner, you haven't stopped. And, I think about it, just with recent events and people that I've known that have passed, like, if I were not to make it tomorrow, like, what would I want to have been my experience of life? Do I want to, my whole 30s or 40s, haven't hit the 50s yet, y'all. But, do I want to, if the doctor told me tomorrow, like, hey, Carl, you got 6 months left, how would I want to spend that 6 months? Grinding and working? Yes, I want to work hard, but I also want to make sure that I have really meaningful experiences. So what it looks like now is me taking vacation, using my PTO, sometimes clearing some of my schedule on a Friday, scheduling time with my friends, because, my friends I grew up with, people got kids, people got jobs, and say, hey, y'all, like, we need to just chill. And sometimes, dudes, we're like, nah, I'm focused. I can't, I got kids. I can't rest. And, I gotta, like, we have this thing, like, in order for my kids in order for me to do the things that are going to help my kids, I have to take self-sacrifice rest. I have to sacrifice social time. And, I don't know the statistics on it, but I think about as men, as we get older, our social lives change. Not all of us, but for a lot of us, it's like, what? I just got to be this family person. I got to work. I got to provide, and that's it. And I don't invest in myself in any other way. So for me, I challenge that, for myself. It's like, what? There's things that I want to do. And whatever it is that it is for you, for some people, it's like, I'm going to make time to play some ball, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to talk to my friends. I'm going to take vacation. I'm going to treat myself to, dinner or something like that. I think those are the things that I do now, that are really important for me. I work hard. I still work more than one job. That hasn't changed. But I also think about, my bandwidth. I think about, how I want to feel. So, I consider all of those things, and I'm still a work in progress with that.
Nah, I think it's beautifully said what you said, and I feel that completely. So I guess my last question, because I know you have things to do soon. Mm-hmm. What is the next step for you in your process, and what brings you joy and peace now at your point in your life?
Yeah, I think the next step for me is just continuing to evolve. I think that at different points in my life, I was like, this is it. Once I get here, this is going to be it. It was, for me, there was a point where I was like, I'm going to be a school social worker, and that's going to be it forever. And then I became a school social worker, and I'm like, this is cool, but I don't know. I think there's something else out there for me. And then I went into my current, full-time position, which is, working with high school students and supporting them, filling the gaps of some of the mental health support. And I realized that that's not it. It's where I am now, and I'm cultivating and creating and building something that I think is going to be beautiful. But I think for me, it's always thinking about what's the next level and what kind of draws me. And I think what will draw me in the future is just being able to create spaces that center wellness, specifically for Black and brown folks, but from a community perspective, from talking about being male as part of my identity. I want to be able to show up in spaces and talk about black mental health as Black males, because that's my identity. Specifically, around heterosexual, cisgendered Black males. I think, that our conversations about mental health are a little wonky. I mean, they happen, but I think that there's so much more that we can do. When I think about Black males and even males that are in my life, it's very rare that we can be vulnerable with each other. I might see you and say, how are you doing? And you're like, I'm good. But really, you might really be struggling. But you don't feel like it's okay for you to be like, yo, Carl, this week is really tough. And if we're struggling, I'm struggling. You might feel, and I'm not saying you, just as an example, but like that can be really hard for us to say to another male and say like, yeah, man, I'm really struggling. This week kicked my ass. And without people feeling, sometimes it's like, well, is he going to think that I'm soft? Is he going to think that I'm, whatever the thing is? Yeah. But I want to be able to create a space where we can be transparent, where we can be vulnerable with each other. And those are healing spaces, to talk about how when we feel hurt, when we feel disappointed, maybe even shed some tears, because tears are okay. I want to be able to cultivate those things. I think those things I want to be able to shift the perspectives that we have. And I think, like I said, duality. You can be, a masculine man and whatever that means to you, and also be sensitive. Like you don't have to be all of one or all of the other. And I want to be able to create spaces for Black and brown people, but specifically for Black men, to be able to sit in all of that. Sit in our power, sit in our vulnerability, sit in things that are feeling raw, and normalize that and support each other. I feel like that's where I'm going in the future. I see that happening with kids, with young people. I see that happening with people my age and older. It's like being in war and never getting it, and never, it's like you're grandfather, great grandfather who was in the war and comes back and never talks about it, but just is like emotionally unavailable and jaded and just like, I don't want to keep passing that down. You know, I think I want to pass down this emotional intelligence. And the thing is, we say like, oh, you know, we can't, we got to be strong, we got to do this. We're dealing with our mental health, not all of us, but some of us are trying to drink it away, smoke it away, you know, thug it away, you know, or gangster it away. Like, we're doing all of that, but really all of that's pain. I love music. I love drill music, you know, even that. And what I hear in that is also pain. You know, I'm doing these things because of how these things in the environment are impacting me. And yeah, I want us to be able, yes, express it in those ways and be able to explore it, but can we do it in ways that are also vulnerable? So, yeah.
No, I think what you said is very impactful and important, and I think a lot of men could resonate with what you're saying. And I'll say this real quick before we wrap up. I'm very much grateful for you. I'm grateful for what you do and the work that you do. There is a not-for-profit that I have called Brothers Rising Over Stigmas that I think you'll be perfect for. And creating safe spaces for us to speak and be unapologetically black men is something I think needs to happen, especially when it comes to our black male masculinity and maleness. I think that's really important. So kudos to you for being able to see that. And people want to follow you, connect with you. Where can they go to do so?
Yeah, I'm really not that great with the socials, but I'm on LinkedIn under Carl Jackman, LMSW. Not really on Instagram, but LinkedIn is probably the best way. I promise I'll be better. I'm evolved into the 21st century. But yeah, that's the best way to find me, like, professionally. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, you're tuned in to Talk Ain't Cheap, and y'all know the slogan is not that deep. It's a vibe. If y'all enjoy Talk Ain't Cheap, like I said, follow the brands, Talk Ain't Cheap Network, the Cletus Group, and Immaculate Scent, because the candles is the smell of the vibes.
Hey.
And we have to love ourselves, and that's how we do it. But like I said, you're tuned in to Talk Ain't Cheap. It's not that deep. It's a vibe.